So here's the uncomfortable truth. There is a small but not insignificant chance that the person sitting across from you at work, the one smiling a little too confidently in every meeting, the one who somehow always avoids consequences when things go wrong, is in fact a psychopath. And no, I don't mean the Hollywood version with knives, dramatic lighting, and a soundtrack that lets you know you should run. I mean the clinically boring, everyday psychopath. The kind who doesn't stab you, but somehow convinces you to volunteer for extra work while they take a 3-hour lunch. Before we get into this, do me a favour. Drop a comment with what other psychological quirks you'd like explained, because human brains are basically a circus, and I enjoy pointing at the clowns. And of course like and subscribe, because YouTube metrics reward manipulation, and if that isn't the most psychopathic system ever invented, I don't know what is. Alright, so what actually is a psychopath? If you're thinking serial killer, then congratulations, you've watched too much Netflix. And if you're wondering how to actually spot one in real life, stick around until the end, we'll get to that. The term comes from psychology, not Netflix screenwriters, and it doesn't always mean violent criminal. It can mean that, but mostly it means someone whose brain is wired with a set of traits that make them, let's call it, uniquely unburdened by empathy, guilt, or the basic social glue that keeps the rest of us from turning into jerks full time. Psychopaths make up about 1% of the general population, which doesn't sound like much, until you realise that means there are literally millions of them walking around, blending in, buying groceries, running companies, maybe even running countries. If you're suddenly reviewing your entire friend group, good, that's the correct reaction. Psychologists have been fascinated by psychopaths for a long time, mostly because they're terrifying and confusing. The term psychopathy started showing up in the 19th century, back when everyone was diagnosing everyone else with moral insanity, which honestly sounds like the name of a punk band. Then, in the 20th century, we got the Canadian psychologist Robert Hare, who became the unofficial psychopath whisperer. He created the psychopathy checklist, the gold standard for spotting these folks. Think of it as a BuzzFeed quiz, except instead of telling you which Disney princess you are, it tells you whether you're likely to con people out of their life savings. Here's the catch. Psychopaths are not the same thing as sociopaths, although people love to use the words interchangeably. Roughly speaking, psychopaths are thought to be born this way, their brains literally lacking some of the wiring that makes empathy possible. Sociopaths, on the other hand, are more like environmental disasters, moulded by terrible childhoods, neglect, abuse, or growing up next to a coal plant. And before you ask, no, not every jerk is a psychopath. Your ex who ghosted you wasn't necessarily psychopathic, though they may have simply been inconsiderate, cowardly, or, worst of all, really into crypto. But when we talk about psychopaths, we're not talking about fleeting bad behaviour. We're talking about a consistent, lifelong pattern of traits that don't go away with therapy, yoga, or green juice cleanses. Fun fact. Some of the earliest detailed case studies were doctors observing prisoners who, to quote, seemed unable to form conscience. These were people who looked normal, spoke well, often seemed likeable, but stole, lied, and harmed others without blinking. The paradox fascinated psychiatrists. How could someone wear the mask of humanity so convincingly while lacking the software behind it? So how do you actually spot a psychopath without, accusing everyone who annoys you at brunch? Researchers break down psychopathy into a few key traits. Let's go through them. First, superficial charm. Psychopaths are smooth. They can talk their way into jobs they aren't qualified for, relationships they don't care about, and out of situations that should land them in jail. Imagine someone who could sell you bottled tap water for $50 and make you feel like you got the deal of the century. That's the level of charm we're talking about. Second, lack of empathy. They don't feel what you feel. When you're upset, a psychopath might mimic concern, but it's basically emotional lip syncing. They know the words, but there's no music behind it. Third, lack of guilt or remorse. You might stay up at night replaying that awkward thing you said in 10th grade. A psychopath? They could burn down an orphanage and still sleep like a baby. Fourth, impulsivity. Psychopaths are like toddlers with credit cards. They act first, deal with consequences later, if at all. This makes them exciting at parties, terrifying in relationships, and occasionally great entrepreneurs, because who else would think, sure, let's build a rocket company and just figure it out as we go? And finally, manipulativeness. They treat people like chess pieces, except it's not even real chess. It's more like they're playing Monopoly, and you're the unlucky idiot who agreed to be the thimble. Now you might be wondering, could this explain why your roommate always eats your food, even though their name is clearly not written on your leftovers? Possibly. But the difference is, your roommate probably feels a little guilty, even if they don't admit it. A psychopath wouldn't. They'd eat your food, convince you already ate it, and then gaslight you into apologizing for accusing them. Corporate leadership, fun fact, has a higher percentage of psychopaths than the general population. About 4%, compared to 1% in everyday society. Which means that if you've ever wondered why so many CEOs seem bizarrely detached from reality, well, turns out sometimes capitalism is just a very elegant way to reward psychopathic traits. Here's where things get wild. Psychopaths' brains are physically different. Neuroimaging studies show reduced activity in the amygdala, the part of your brain that processes fear and emotions, which means that while you're panicking over an upcoming presentation, they're just sitting there like a lizard on a warm rock, unbothered. Their prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making, also behaves differently. It's like their brain is running on a different operating system. Where you or I might get a giant red warning screen that says, "Don't do this, it's stupid," they get a pop-up that says, "Why not?" And it doesn't stop there. Studies also show weaker connections between the amygdala and the frontal lobes. The feeling and planning centers don't talk as much. In practical terms, it's like their emotional brakes aren't hooked up to the steering wheel. They can see the curve in the road, but there's nothing stopping them from hitting it at full speed. This explains why psychopaths often report feeling bored more easily. Regular human life, with its slow lines at the DMV and the sheer number of times you have to wash dishes, feels unbearable to them. So they chase stimulation, which can mean risky business deals, reckless behaviour, or, if they're particularly ambitious, politics. And here's a fun evolutionary twist. Some researchers think psychopathy may have had survival benefits in prehistoric times. Imagine a tribe facing a saber-toothed tiger. The empathic, cautious folks are debating whether it's safe. Meanwhile, the psychopath is already sprinting toward the tiger with a stick. Sometimes, reckless fearlessness means survival. Other times, well, natural selection. There's also the charisma factor. That same underactive fear system makes them unusually calm under pressure. Job interview, courtroom trial, awkward first date. They stay cool while everyone else sweats through their shirts. In the modern world, that calmness can look like leadership, when in reality it's just neurological indifference. Today, though, that same wiring means they're the person cutting you off in traffic at 90 miles per hour because they were bored. Evolution didn't quite anticipate rush hour or insurance premiums. So how do you actually spot one in the wild without becoming the kind of person who diagnoses your relatives at Thanksgiving? Pay attention to consistency. Psychopaths are great at first impressions, but over time, their stories don't line up. They'll tell you about their amazing career success, but the details shift depending on the day. It's like listening to a bad improv show. Entertaining at first, then deeply confusing. Watch how they treat people they don't need. Anyone can be polite to their boss. But do they treat the barista like a human being? Or do they act like everyone else exists as NPCs in their personal video game? Look at their relationships. Most people maintain friendships with some effort, even if it's just trading memes. Psychopaths tend to drop people once they're no longer useful. Their contact list looks less like friends, and more like a Rolodex of temporary business cards. And vulnerability? Forget it. If they do share something personal, it often sounds rehearsed, like they copied it from a daytime talk show. It's vulnerability theatre. Think of it as someone describing grief by reading the Wikipedia page for grief out loud. Accurate words, zero actual emotion. Another giveaway is their emotional range. They'll mimic the right expressions, but the timing is off. Imagine someone laughing at a punchline 2 seconds too late, like their brain was buffering. That uncanny delay is often where the mask slips. Here's a fun image. Hervey Cleckley, the psychiatrist who wrote The Mask of Sanity in the 1940s, described psychopaths as wearing a convincing mask of normal human behaviour. Underneath, though, there's emptiness. Imagine a Halloween mask with no face behind it. That's the unsettling vibe. To make it relatable, a psychopath is like a rental car. Looks shiny, smells good, drives fine for a while, but put some miles on it, and suddenly the brakes are sketchy, the check engine light is mysteriously missing, and you're 90% sure the last driver did something illegal in it. And much like that rental car, you don't want to be the one left holding the bill when it inevitably breaks down. So, that's your crash course in spotting a psychopath. If you now feel suspicious of half the people in your life, congratulations, you're paying attention. Just remember, not every selfish, manipulative, overly confident person qualifies. Some are just ordinary humans, which is depressing enough. But the next time someone charms you into doing something against your better judgment, or shrugs off catastrophic consequences like they just spilled some milk, ask yourself, am I looking at a psychopath? And if you are, maybe don't confront them directly. They'll probably just convince you it was your idea. Like and subscribe, because nothing says trustworthy like listening to a stranger on the internet explain why your boss, your ex, and maybe even your dog walker might be psychopaths. See you next time, unless of course, a psychopath has already convinced me to join their pyramid scheme.